everybody, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible video. Back to the reviews of the Revival series. I'm glad I've been able to mix it up lately with a couple of best ofs, especially the one with Peter Lupus. It's given me some ideas on how maybe I can try and generate some more of those. So wish me luck. Let's see how that works out. But anyway, this time I'm going to be talking about the Revival series, Season 2, Episode 3, which is called The Princess. So this one starts out in a room where two guys are having a look at some film footage involving a prince and princess and their security detail. One of the men pays the other off with money in a briefcase, handcuffing it to him for protection, and the other leaves sheepishly, saying he's betrayed his country. Heading to his car, the man finds that the key won't unlock the cuffs and the briefcase explodes, killing him as the other man watches from a window. Jim goes to a rowing club for his instructions using the usual spy speak. The mission. We learn that the princess is an American named Elaine, who is married to the ruler Prince Arkady of the Principality of Valence, which is totally not Monaco. Valence is moving towards democracy and Western ideals, and even allowing the U.S. to construct a naval base nearby. The man we saw earlier doing the payoff is Gregor Caron, who plans to kill the princess as part of a plot to terrorize the prince to prevent the political change, and the IMF must prevent Elaine's death. We get a real apartment scene this time, in which Jim explains that Caron is low on funds now that he made this payoff, and Elaine refuses to leave the country because she refuses to be scared away from an upcoming film festival, which is near and dear to her heart and supports the country's economy. Off we go to Valence, where the IMF sets up the usual abandoned warehouse as a production facility. Jim, as producer Harry Palmer, shows off Shannon to the royal couple as the star of his upcoming film. Grant taps into the building's cameras to take a look at people who might be potential assassins, seeing if they come up in the IM database, while Nicholas goes to an extremely seedy bar to try and find Caron's organization called the Red Guard, and Grant joins him, putting a tap on the bar phone. Caron happens to be there, and Nicholas tells him that he's one of the armored car personnel for the casino, and wants the Red Guard's help to steal one of the nightly takes. Caron's man pulls a knife on Nicholas while Caron validates that he is who he says he is, with Shannon intercepting the call and confirming the information. Grant joins the group as Nicholas's partner, telling him the details of their plan. Caron is skeptical, thinking that Nicholas is engaging him because he doesn't have the guts to get his hands dirty, but Nicholas demonstrates that he's quite willing to mix it up when necessary. So Caron agrees to the plan. The next morning, the men go into action as they lead the armored car into an ambush, and Grant drills into its roof, spraying anesthetic gas, with Nicholas driving in front of the truck to stop it. He and Caron take the truck away, while Grant signals the others that the plan worked. Grant conveniently forgets to remove the anesthetic, knocking out Caron while Nicholas uses a clever breathing device and returns to the IMF warehouse. Caron wakes in the facility where he sees sadistic Officer Max roughing up Nicholas and demanding information about the impending assassination. Jim plays quieter good cop and asks Caron to spare himself the hurt, indicating that Max unfortunately killed his man before they could get any of the details out of him. Caron says that the assassination will happen no matter what happens to him or his man. Then Jim decides to shoot Nicholas to show he really means business and won't stop until he learns what he wants to know. Caron is shocked beyond belief at Jim's cold-bloodedness, and then finds Jim's gun pointed at his heart. Caron breaks and tells Jim that he hired a secretive professional killer named Coyote, who no one has ever actually seen. He uses a woman as his contact to get the information about the job and the money, and then disappears, and a contract with Coyote can't be canceled. Max is skeptical, but Jim believes the story. Nicholas tells Caron that they have everything on tape, jumping up to Caron's surprise. His man is still alive, and they knock him out so that they can put him back in the armored car and call the police to pick him up. Grant confirms that Coyote is as advertised, a skilled assassin who operates around the world and strikes almost randomly, always successfully. Jim tells Grant to profile Coyote, who seems to conduct the killings in front of large crowds, figuring his ego is a big part of his personality. The next day at a press conference for the film festival, Jim announces that he is shelving his current project in favor of a different one, a portrait of the legendary assassin Coyote, introducing Max in the starring role, with Shannon acting a little bit petulantly to taking the backseat role of the princess who Coyote is planning to kill. A woman watches intently as the IMF members talk about the role and what they've learned about how Coyote works and how he thinks, and gets a bit peeved at Jim's taunts, pulling out a menacing gun. The woman goes to the IMF warehouse, watching the tape of Quran and looking at some of the other things they have left around. The IMF return and she hides on the stairs. Jim and Shannon enter, and Shannon somehow realizes that someone's there. The woman takes 2 shots and Shannon is hit as the woman daringly jumps out a window and runs away, shooting at Grant, who chases her, but she's able to get away. Shannon is taken to the hospital in critical condition, and Jim and the others are completely distraught, of course. Grant wonders how Shannon could have known that someone was there, and leaves the others to return to the warehouse to try and figure out how that's possible. Shannon wakes for a brief moment, telling Jim one word: camion. It's a French word for carriage or truck, which of course doesn't help much, until Grant does the equivalent of a 1980s Google search somehow and realizes from a fashion magazine that camion is a perfume, which Shannon must have smelled when she entered the warehouse. Max realizes the truth about Coyote, who we next see back at her apartment, setting up a simple but compact bomb. Meanwhile, Grant has a gadget of his own, a spectral analyzer that can detect the presence of the perfume, combined with samples of Coyote's skin left on devices around the warehouse. Grant figures by checking all of the women at the film festival, they can identify her with arousing any suspicion. Shannon starts to recover, and Jim thanks her for cracking the case, assuring her that they'll get Coyote at the opening reception. Coyote prepares to attend, putting on a formal suit and setting up her hair to be somewhat boyish, while Grant starts pointing his analyzer at the women attending, not finding a match, of course. Coyote arrives with a media pass and places a tape near the podium as the royal couple arrives and Elaine starts a speech. Coyote smugly passes by Jim's table with a smirk and just happens to get in the way of Grant's scanner, resulting in a match. Grant yells out to the other team members, but Coyote evades him and jumps out a window. Grant finds her rigged tape machine and throws it out the same window, killing her in the explosion. The IMF returns to the hospital to have an everyone laughs ending with Shannon. Mission accomplished. There is not as much to say about this episode as there might be for some others. And I attribute that mostly to the fact that this is a good episode and there's not really that much to pick apart. It's usually in the picking apart where the reviews kind of tend to run long, I think. I definitely give this episode a solid A. I was thinking A-, but then I said, you know what? There's really not a lot of bad here. At least I couldn't kind of account for it. Starting off just with kind of a point counterpoint. This is an episode that in retrospect, I think the writers kind of had an idea of a story that they wanted to do. And then they said, all right, how can we fit this into the Mission Impossible formula? So I think, obviously I have no first-hand knowledge, but it does seem logical to me that what they did was take the story and then say, okay, well, why don't we put it in a foreign country, have this kind of Cold War thing going on, in as a backdrop to it, and have it be a film festival, so that we can execute the plan the way that we've laid out in the story. So, on the one hand, I look at it, it's like, yeah, gosh, guys, you're going to throw your backs out. That's kind of a reach. However, they are trying to not just have a story for story's sake. And I remember commenting on a lot of episodes back in season 7 of the original, how everything just kind of seemed like an excuse plot. There was no good reason for the IMF to be involved in certain things at all. It was just dumb. And at least here, I do give the writers credit for, trying to make it sensible, fitting it in as something that the IMF should be involved with. And I think most importantly, the episode kind of doesn't dwell on it. It's mentioned. The whole thing about the prince and the princess, the episode is titled The Princess, but she's not even really much of a factor in the actual episode itself. She's mentioned, they go to the meat and potatoes of the episode, and they just kind of keep things going. And I actually think that's good. That's far above average to the typical effort that the writers sometimes put into these stories, which end up just being excuse plots. That said, moving on to what I think is really good here. I think that the story itself, with the surprise reveal of Coyote being who she actually turns out to be, is really well done. It is a sensible and cogent story. There is suspense here right until the very end, because Coyote's got a lot of tricks up her sleeves. And the way that she goes about it, and the way that Dale Stevens, the actress, portrays her, I think is really, really well done. Really good casting choice in choosing Dale Stevens for that role. I don't know very much about her. She's an Australian actress. She's been in all sorts of different kinds of shows. And like I said, really good job here. I also feel that Coyote is a good antagonist. She's got a touch of lameness due to her pride and her ego. But she's smart enough that the IMF, she's worthy of being, an opponent for the IMF, which is more than we'll be able to say with several of the antagonists that we're going to see in season 2. Grigor Karan, who we saw in the first part of the episode and who seemed to be the antagonist and was based on the mission briefing, not so much. The IMF make really short work of him. I don't want to characterize him as completely a lame schmuck, but boy, it's not really difficult at all for the IMF to kind of take him down. So whether he's lame, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's really the characteristic I want to pin on him. But as a schmuck, yeah, I think he does kind of fit that bill. Speaking of Karan, though, I love the way that the IMF pull off the play with Karan. The armored car heist is visually very, very cool. The way that Grant, drills into the top, puts in the anesthetic gas, Nicholas gets in front of the car and is able to slow down its momentum so they can stop it. Really, really neat. And then after that, the whole sequence of, Jim and Max kind of playing good cop, bad cop, which actually turns into bad cop, even worse cop, was really well done, I feel. And then to kind of top it off, they neutralize Karan in a very creative way by, knocking him out, putting him back in the armored car, and calling the cops to go pick him up. So now he becomes completely a non-factor. He can tell, like when the IMF pulls this sort of thing off on somebody, even if that person were to go and tell people the truth, they'd be like, oh yeah, sure, there was this silver-haired guy who pretended to shoot this other guy, but he really didn't shoot him, right? And this all happened where, you say? Oh, you can't remember. Yeah, sure, whatever. So I really like the way that whole thing played out. I thought that was excellent. I also like the use of gadgetry in this episode, especially that spectral analyzer that Grant uses at the end. It's a little bit off the wall, but it's used very sensibly. It makes sense. It's explained, in a few sentences by Grant. And we don't need a really big explanation. Because it plays out visually. We can see on the screen when Grant is pointing his laser at various ladies. Match, no match, that kind of thing. We can just see by the color of the spectrum and all of that kind of stuff. No huge explanation is necessary. So even though it is a pretty elaborate piece of equipment, it would be in real life, it's simple to display, and the message can be conveyed very easily, which I think is a real good plus when we're talking about gadgetry on this show. A little bit of fridge brilliance. I mentioned in the beginning that, this episode is called The Princess, even though the princess herself is an extremely minor character. But it's actually a really good way to avoid revealing the swerve in this episode and the reveal that Coyote is really a woman. And that's what the episode is really all about at its core. And and that's neat, because now as an audience we really kind of don't know what to expect, and we're not giving too much of it away. So I really like that. Another interesting note that I found in looking up some of the bios of the actors and actresses: Tottie Goldsmith, who plays Elaine in this episode, actually turns out to be the niece of Olivia Newton-John, who tragically passed away last year. But I just thought, wow, small world. It's amazing the relationships that we find on this show. A couple of episodes we saw the lady who ended up marrying Russell Crowe, and now we have the niece of Olivia Newton-John. How about that? Another thing that I thought about, and I said, either this is, fridge dumbness or fridge brilliance. I'm kind of not sure. One thing that does seem a little bit problematic here in this episode is the IMF, and again, specifically Jim, being caught unprepared for Coyote potentially coming to their warehouse and, being drawn out by, Jim's kind of taunting of Coyote. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time, and I have a feeling it's not going to be the last, where Jim seems maybe a little bit overconfident, maybe almost a little bit careless about his tactics. A very good example was in last season's episode Spy, where Jim, wasn't really too concerned about going up against Christie, the MI6 agent that the IMF was going after, who had all sorts of information about, agents around the world, and of course used that to put Jim at serious risk. And I wondered about that, because I said, on the one hand, they're targeting this assassin Coyote, even from the very, very minor and basic profiling that they do from the very beginning. They realize that Coyote seems to have this ego and pride in what he does. They obviously think that it's a man. I just kind of wonder, okay, Jim, since you've already figured that out, don't you think that by taunting such a person, they would have a tendency to come after you? It kind of seems logical to do that. And Jim has put himself out there as, a producer who's involved in this film festival. He's told people that he's Harry Palmer. The IMF has put up signs outside their warehouse, Harry Palmer Productions, and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure. Was Jim just kind of relying on the fact that they'd only been there for a couple of days and was hoping Coyote wouldn't find them? I don't know. There might be something kind of missing there. It struck me at first as maybe Jim just being a little bit careless again, and that bothered me a little bit. However, it's mitigated a little bit. The IMF is obviously under some time pressure. They don't know exactly when Coyote is going to strike, but now with what they have learned, they figure it's going to be, at the reception or at some point where the princess has to make an appearance and has to be in a whole bunch of people. So they have to kind of draw Coyote out a little bit. And of course, they went into the whole thing not knowing who exactly they were up against. They didn't know until Karan told them his plan and what he had done, and told them that he had engaged Coyote, that they would be that's actually what they would end up having to do at all. So I guess it's a little bit forgivable in terms of that the IMF couldn't possibly be prepared for everything. And in fairness, I have pointed out, I haven't had to in some time, but I definitely remember pointing out in earlier seasons of the original series where some episodes seem to be almost ruined by the fact that the IMF seems to have perfect knowledge. And we said, like how could they have possibly known this or that. So there's a dose of realism here. So I don't know. It could kind of go either way, and I don't want to, bring the grade of the episode down too much because of that. Other things, though, that were kind of weird. We have the usual strained dialogue and kind of silly dialogue at many points in the episode. I don't want to belabor that. That happens in every episode. It's unavoidable. That's just kind of how it was. Whatever. It is what it is. I also did find it kind of strange, though. At when Nicholas is engaging Karan and trying to get into the Red Guard, he uses his real name. He hands over his ID, and it says, plain as day, his picture, and Nicholas Black. Why would he risk that? The others don't use their real names. Jim says he's Harry Palmer. Would it have been such a big deal for Nicholas to have called himself, I don't know, could have made up any name. I kind of don't get it. In the previous episode, The Golden Serpent, I commented that the IMF in many cases use their real first names, but they use fictitious last names. Even that was a little bit strained, and now here we have a situation where not even all of them, but just one person is using their real name. Just bugs me. Doesn't really make a whole heck of a lot. Finally, I'll just talk about the callbacks from this episode. I thought about the killer, where the IMF is going after an assassin who works kind of randomly. It's different though. In the killer, they knew who they were after. They just didn't know exactly how they would actually nab that person. So maybe that's not the best callback. Probably the most obvious one and the most appropriate one would be to the season 7 episode called Movie. It's similar in that the settings are very, very similar in simulating like a movie studio or a production facility. They did that in both episodes. And they also used a film script in order to draw out and nab their target. So in terms of the way kind of the plot moves along and some of the plot devices that were used, I think that Movie is probably the best callback for this one. And I think that's what I have to say for this one. Shorter review than usual. That's a good thing. So now just leave it at that. I'm happy with my grade of A for this one. This is a quality episode in a lot of ways. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I appreciate the increase in subscriptions that we've gotten, especially, I think, due to the most recent video with the comments I was able to bring over from Peter Lupus directly. Please continue to subscribe and spread the love for this channel. I very, very much appreciate it. Also, please leave your comments for this episode and other episodes. I'm really loving the increase in comments that I'm seeing as well. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.